Before we begin, I have an important announcement at the end of this video, so stick around for that, because your very survival may depend on it. Or it may not, you'll just have to stick around and find out. A few weeks ago, my brother drew my attention to the fact that the historic vessel PS Waverly was visiting London. Well, that's a golden opportunity for a video if ever I saw one. So in early October, I took a trip from London to Gravesend aboard the last sea-going paddle steamer in the world. Despite looking terribly archaic, the Waverley was only built in 1947. She was built for the London and North Eastern Railway, and the story of why a railway company would want a pleasure boat goes back many, many years before her keel was even laid down. The invention of the steamboat basically made boat trips for pleasure practical. Steamboats, not being so reliant on the tides and the winds, could operate to timetables. They offered working families an affordable way to get out of the city. It will come as no surprise that many, many boats operated along the River Clyde. Not only is this a major waterway that serves the west coast of Scotland and the port city of Glasgow, but in the 19th and 20th centuries it was the greatest shipbuilding centre in the world. By the end of the 19th century there were literally hundreds of steamers thronging the already crowded Clyde. In the 1860s, the North British Railway decided they wanted to get in on this, and so they founded the North British Steam Packet Company in 1866. This had mixed success, but what's important to our story is that in 1899 they purchased the PS Waverly. But not the same PS Waverly. This one was still a paddle steamer, and one that operated successfully into the 1930s. However, by that time she was getting on a bit. The North British Railway had been folded into the London and North Eastern Railway in 1923, and the LNER had plans drawn up in 1938 for her replacement. The old Waverley was laid up in 1939 and might have been broken up were it not for the intervention of war. She would get one last opportunity to demonstrate her worth in 1940 at the evacuation of Dunkirk, when, like so many similarly unlikely vessels, she was drafted in to rescue marooned troops. Sadly, this would be the end. She was targeted by German bombers and sunk, with the loss of several crew and an estimated 400 soldiers. The fact that it took 12 bombers half an hour to get a single hit says a lot for the skill of the crew and the manoeuvrability of the ship. After the war, the LNER could finally build a replacement. The keel of the second Waverley was laid down in 1945 at the yard of A&J Ingalls in Glasgow. She was launched in 1946 on the River Kelvin, and she entered service on the 16th of June 1947. Incidentally, if you're wondering where the name comes from, she's named after the novel by Walter Scott, like the station in Edinburgh. She is powered by a 3-crank diagonal triple expansion engine. Initially, she was coal-fired with a double-ended Scotch boiler. By 1947, the golden age of the Clyde steamers was long gone, but nevertheless, the Waverley was kept busy on cruises around the locks and the islands. Her time with the LNER was actually less than 6 months, because on the 1st of January 1948, the railways of mainland Britain were nationalised. Ownership of the Waverley transferred to British Railways, but she would be operated by the Caledonian Steam Packet Company, which was owned by British Railways. In 1952, ownership would be transferred to the Caledonian Steam Packet Company, so instead of being owned by British Railways, it would be owned by British Railways. It probably makes sense to someone out there. In 1956, she was converted from coal to oil firing. In 1969, the Caledonian Steam Packet Company was transferred over to the Scottish Transport Group. British Railways had been undergoing a process of modernisation and restructuring, and part of that involved getting rid of things that weren't, to do with railways. That same year, the paddle steamer Talisman was withdrawn from service, and that left Waverley as the last of the Clyde steamers still at work. In 1973, the Caledonian fleet was merged with David McBrain Limited to form Caledonian McBrain Limited, or CalMac. Unfortunately, CalMac had no place for a relic of the steam age in their fleet, especially one that needed the kinds of repairs that Waverley did at this point. Fortunately, they didn't want to scrap her if they could avoid it, and the Paddle Steamer Preservation Society were keen to take her on. And so Waverley was sold in 1974 for £1. Now, historic ships are kind of a hard thing to preserve. A classic car can be maintained by one person, a steam locomotive by a group of volunteers with a workshop. A ship, though, is a whole other ballgame. The work required to keep a vessel of that size seaworthy is enormous, and neither Calmac nor the PSPS thought that Waverley would work again. Except she did. The following year, in fact, following a successful fundraising drive. And she wouldn't just be sailing around Scotland. She paid visits to England and Wales. In 1977 she ran aground on the rocks at Dunoon, and for the first time it seemed that her future was truly in jeopardy. Not only did she suffer damage, but she lost out on 6 weeks of revenue. But she was saved, and the following year she would visit London for the first time. In 1980 she sailed to France to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Dunkirk in the place of her predecessor. In 1985 she'd sailed to Ireland and the Isle of Man. It seemed that she was going from strength to strength, a more travelled and better-known vessel in preservation than she'd ever been before. She was reboilered in 1981, but by the late 1990s the work was beginning to get to her. Another restoration was needed, and a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund in 1997 saw to it that the money was there. From 2000 to 2003 she was rebuilt in stages. In 2020, 2 new boilers were fitted, albeit progress was hampered by that big pandemic thing that happened then. These days, Waverley performs much the same duties that she always did, carrying people on pleasure cruises around the British Isles. If anything, the scope of her duties has increased. She travels further afield than she used to, and she's often called upon for special events and filming. The Waverley may be a relic, but no one seems to have told her that. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, which was only tangentially connected to trains. If you did enjoy it, please do click the like button and consider subscribing for more. I have at least one more historic ship video in the pipeline, so keep an eye out for that. Speaking of historic ships, that reminds me. I have an announcement to make. You see, I've written a play. It's an adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's classic novel, Treasure Island. I say adaptation, it's basically an excuse for me to make a bunch of silly jokes about pirates, because that's what I like doing in my spare time. The play is directed by my good friend and frequent collaborator Asher Gill, and she's assembled an excellent cast. It's fun for all the family, unless your family is really fond of the original novel. The play is on at Hampton Hill Theatre in West London from the 25th to the 29th of October 2023, and hopefully I'll see you there. How do I normally close these things out? Oh yes, thanks as ever to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon and here on YouTube for your ever-generous support. You are the new boilers to my triple expansion engine. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.